I was reflecting on the topic of setting goals. Obviously, we are approaching the end of the year. We're about to go into 2026, so everyone is buzzing with New Year goals, New Year's resolutions, and so on. But I realized that this year I want to take a different approach. Instead of thinking about things that I want to achieve, I want to focus on who I want to become. That's when I realized that maybe the New Year you is not someone who has achieved certain things, but rather someone who has become a better version of you. So if we look at it through a lens of spiritual growth for the new year, this is how you can change your goal setting. Instead of telling yourself that you have to pray more, ask yourself why. Why do you want to pray more? Is it because you want to have a relationship with God? Or do you just think you have to do it out of duty? I think when we are able to shift our mindset, especially in the spiritual setting, from I have to do this as if it's a duty, to I want to do this because I want to know God more, because I want to get to know Him, I want to know what He has to say about my life. I think that has a massive impact on how we approach our spiritual journey and how we approach faith in God. So instead of telling yourself that you have to pray more, maybe you should tell yourself that you want to have a relationship with God. Because with God, it's not really about how much you pray, but it's about how connected you are with God and how much you allow Him to be involved in all aspects of your life. Many times we tend to overcomplicate this. I used to be like that as well. I used to think that in order to pray, I had to be in my room by myself and just have the time to focus. And of course, it's nice when you have those moments and it's good to have them. But daily life doesn't always allow for this. And so that's why it's important to not overcomplicate things and realize that you can actually talk to God at any time of the day, anywhere you are, whether it's noisy or quiet, whether you are at university or at work, or whether you're in a bus or in the tube or at the gym. Anywhere you are, you can talk to God at any time. We overcomplicate things so much when it comes to God. We think that in order to be spiritual, we have to be doing things in a certain way. But really, what God wants is connection. And that's what prayer is all about. And to make it easier, let's redefine what prayer actually is. Prayer should be communication with God. So if you understand it from that point of view, your goal is no longer I have to pray more, but your goal is I want to grow a closer relationship with God. I want to communicate with Him more often. So I will try to do that as often as I can during the day. It doesn't need to follow a set structure. It can just be a simple communication between you and God. And that shift alone is going to transform you from someone who wants to pray more to someone who is actually able to communicate with God on a daily basis. And that alone is going to help you to grow closer to Him. And when I say communicate, I mean share with Him what you think. Tell Him what you're struggling with. Ask Him for advice in a simple way, the same way you would ask a friend, for example. And then similar to this, if you want to accelerate your spiritual growth in the new year, instead of setting a goal of having to read the Bible more, reframe your mindset to thinking, I want to know what God has to say about this. I think as humans, we find it very difficult to comply with obligations that we put on ourselves. We get into the cycle of trying to exercise self-discipline, then we fail, and then we feel bad, so we try to do it again, and the cycle continues. That's why a lot of times just reframing the way we approach something can have a massive impact on whether we are actually able to carry out that action. I need to read the Bible more is an empty obligation that you are placing on yourself that has no real practical value on your life, because if you are not reading it enough now, it means maybe you don't understand why you should read it, or you think you don't have time, or you're too busy. But it's different when you approach it as, I want to know what God has to say about this. I want to know what God has to say about anxiety or worry. I want to know what God has to say about becoming stronger, about being more confident. I want to know what God has to say about becoming wiser and making right choices, about discerning friends and discerning situations. It's very different when you frame it from this lens instead of it just being a goal of, oh, I have to read the Bible more. And then in line with this point as well, because we are heading into the new year and you are probably thinking about different objectives, different things you want to do in your life, instead of asking God, what do you want me to do? Start asking yourself, how can I give God glory in my life? I remember when I was younger, sometimes the church I used to attend would go out on the streets for evangelizing. And I'll be honest, I was struggling with it. I was really struggling with approaching people in the street, talking to them about God, or approaching people with leaflets about the church and all these kind of things. And for a long time, I felt guilty about it because I was listening to the thoughts that were telling me, you are ashamed of God. You don't want to talk about God to other people. But then later on in my life, I actually realized that wasn't the truth. I never had an issue with speaking about God to other people, whether it was my friends, my family, or even strangers. And that's when I realized that the only thing true about me struggling with evangelizing on the streets is that I find it difficult to approach strangers. That's just my personality. I am an introvert. I don't find it very easy to approach strangers on the streets and start talking to them about whatever it is, to be honest. Because later on in my life, I actually, for a very short period of time, I think 1 or 2 weeks, I did one of those door-to-door jobs where I had to pitch different charities to people to raise donations. And it was just 1 or 2 weeks because as much as I was good at pitching, the whole process was too stressful for me. The whole process of having to knock on people's door and then speaking to strangers the whole day, it was just too stressful. So 2 weeks in, I was like, no, I cannot do this. Which isn't to say that you shouldn't push yourself outside of your comfort zone when you are trying to find ways to give God glory in your life. But it is to say that you should also find your strengths and use your strengths, the talents, the gifts that God has given you, to give Him glory in your life. Don't feel bad if you are not able to do it the way other people do it. Don't feel bad if you struggle with evangelizing on the streets, or if you struggle with singing in the choir, or sharing a testimony on stage. We all have different ways that we can give God glory in our life, and it doesn't need to be the same as everyone else. The important thing is that we find our own way. And so as you are approaching 2026, instead of asking God, what do you want me to do? And then passively waiting for an answer, ask yourself, how can I give God glory in my life right now? What can I start doing in my life that can bring God glory? I think when you are able to change your approach, your results, your achievements will also change, because these things will have transformed you from the inside out. It is very good to have goals for our spiritual growth, to have an interest into growing spiritually, but the best thing you can do for yourself is changing your approach. Changing the approach you have towards God. Instead of seeing Him as a religion, instead of seeing Him as a distant God who is sitting on a throne looking down at you, learn to see Him as a friend. Learn to see Him as a counselor. Learn to see Him as someone who you can go to advice for. And it doesn't need to be complicated. It can just be natural and spontaneous. And maybe in the beginning it's difficult. I'm not saying it isn't. It definitely took me a while to get where I am in my spiritual journey. But the sooner you start to change your perspective and your approach to God and faith, the easier it will become over time. So if you're setting new goals for the new year, for your spiritual growth or for your life in general, I really hope this video has given you some inspiration to change the way you approach it. And maybe instead of focusing on things you want to achieve, focus on the person you want to become. And that said, I want to wish you an incredible new year. A new year where you are finding fresh ways to approach God and faith, where you're letting Him lead your life and finding peace in His presence. Thank you so much again for tuning in today, and I hope to see you on the next one. Bye.